Yeah, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, just appreciate the opportunity to tell just a little bit about me and my background. And yeah, it's interesting. I think I know Ross and the team, have known Matt forever, and I probably didn't really meet Matt until just a little while ago. So it's one of these things where we don't know what we don't know and who we don't know. So just grateful for the opportunity. So I'll probably tend to bounce all over, so feel free to ask questions along the way. But just a little bit of the journey of Todd Nelson here. Um, so started all back in a little town called 𝗵𝗁𝗁𝗀, PA. So if anybody is a beer drinker and you've heard of Yuengling, that is the home of Yuengling. So 𝗵𝗁𝗁𝗀, PA is where Dick Yuengling and his family have their brewery, one of the oldest breweries in the country. So anyway, born there, didn't stay long. My parents are both from that area. So there's two little towns. One's 𝗵𝗁𝗁, one's called 𝗬𝗁 Haven, which is they're 4 miles apart. And so after I was born, my parents decided to relocate down to this area, Bucks County area. And so we've basically been here ever since then. But from a background standpoint, both my parents, both work. My dad's a CPA by trade. My mom is a registered nurse by trade. Both retired now. Well, I suppose my dad's retired. He still does some stuff on the side from a consulting perspective. But the thing that was always important for them is just work hard. So that started from the time I could actually start to understand what work ethic and such was like. So when they moved down to this area, again, they weren't well-to-do. We weren't well off. We scrimped and scraped like everybody else. My dad, in fact, his first job at 𝗟𝗏𝘃, he a couple of times when he first moved here would basically hitchhike to catch a ride to work in Philly. And we were in the Bristol area. So, hearing that story, again, you'll start to hopefully understand the building blocks of why I do what I do and what kind of put me on this path. I'm the oldest of three. So I have two brothers. One's in Reading, PA, one's in Maryland. And then from a perspective of my own family, as we grew up in New Jersey, in South Jersey. Was never a brilliant student. Had to work hard. Had to work hard for a C. Had to work super hard for a B. And if an A came through, I was putting in some serious work. So, but education was extremely important to my family and still is today. Education, family, and our faith. So from the time I can remember I was there, we were in church. My parents, that was one non-negotiable. No matter what was going on, how it was going on, that was a non-negotiable for my brothers and I. And again, like anybody, I'm sure for anybody who has had that lifestyle, there were times where I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's like, it doesn't matter, we're going. But again, it was a discipline. So for not having been in the service, my household was very much like a military organization. My mom was the disciplinarian, and also, just meticulous, which again, things that I continue to latch to. So, as you fast forward through kind of my youth, my high school years, all pretty much the same, right? It's like work hard, got involved in a lot of sports, played soccer, baseball, basketball, football, did all those fun things growing up. And really, again, took a lot of lessons from that I apply today with my family and in my work career. My very first actual job was as soon as I was able to get a work permit. I worked at a McDonald's. That was probably about 3.5 miles from my house at the time. And so, me and my bicycle, every Saturday morning would find our way to McDonald's and be there from 6 a.m. till 2 p.m. That was my favorite shift, by the way. Get in the morning, get out. So, worked from that point forward. I've literally, been working ever since then, and had quite a few stints at McDonald's, by the way, even in my college years. You had to find the weekend beer money somehow. So graduated high school in New Jersey, went to college, Penn State University. And so again, I did the first 2 years at a branch campus. The branch campus was in Pottsville, Schuylkill Haven area where my family was from. So I got 2 years to spend time with my family while I was doing my first 2 years of school. And then my last 2 years, I transferred up to main campus at the main university. Couple just notes, again, it may sound like a broken record. So both of my parents' families are, construction workers, laborers, electricians. So my first 2 years of college, while I was there, I did a lot of construction work, whether it was masonry work, roofing, building houses. I did a lot of manual labor. And while I learned a ton, and I absolutely appreciate the folks that do it, I knew it wasn't for me long term. When I had to do a roof and it was 95 degrees outside, and my grandfather and my uncles didn't care. They were like, "You're going on the roof and you're carrying the shingles up," and that was a very big telltale in my life. Again, it taught me a lot because I did a lot of my own stuff in my own house growing up and with my family, and I still do stuff. But I knew that I didn't want to do that full time. That wasn't my career that I wanted to choose. So 4 years at Penn State, and again, wasn't an easy 4 years. I can actually remember, calculus and that stuff, that was not my strong suit. Math was not my strong suit. I can remember one class, I took a summer class because I had failed it during the semester, convinced my father that, hey, let me take it in the summer. I promise you I'll do better. And I'll never forget the first test. I looked at the first test, I wrote my name on it, I flipped it over, and I wrote a note to the professor and said, "Look, I'm just fooling myself. I can't do this." And I turned it in. Needless to say, that conversation between my father and I didn't go that well after that. But again, I ended up going back and I did end up passing the class third time, but I did end up passing the class after I took it. So, eventually we got there. And then, and like I said, graduated. And so now it's like, hey, it's time to get to work. So now we fast forward to the work time. So my very first job was at a company called Computer Associates. They had a farmers program, and that farmers program was they would take basically fresh out of college graduates and put them into potentially a rotational program. One of the things that I want to note, because you're going to hear this theme, is I had a good friend of mine who was already working at Computer Associates, connected with him, gave me the recommendation, got the job, and that kind of started my work career. I started in really just customer support. I was basically taking phone calls for one of Computer Associates' largest flagship products, and was doing that for 3 years. And at the time, I graduated from college with a degree in computer science and statistics. And I didn't really know if I wanted to dive into what eventually is really just customer support. It's helping problem solve. But in taking the job at Computer Associates, I actually got drawn to a couple aspects of it that have formed where I am today, which was I got to talk to a lot of really interesting people along the way from a support perspective. So while they were calling in with a problem, I actually forged some pretty good relationships with people that I've actually never met physically. But when they called in, we would call each other by first name, like, "Hey, how's it been?" And we would talk about family. And I learned some interesting things, some crazy things and learned a lot about how people discipline their kids. Some very interesting things. But I also, that's where I started building my network of people of who I would connect with over time. And so that was the springboard. So I was there for 3 years at Computer Associates, and had a really good career there. I went from, you're just, hey, I'm the kid out of school, to really the subject matter expert in one of their biggest products that they sold. And so that was a really good education experience for me in terms of how to just grind, just grind hard. And so I did that. And what I learned from there is some of the people that were in Computer Associates, which again was a big organization that I made connections with, I would later, rejoin those folks. So if I fast forward, I was at Computer Associates almost 3 years to the day before I left and went to this small company called Princeton Softtech. Princeton Softtech was a kind of an enterprise data management company and a software testing company. But I got there because one of the people that mentored and trained me at Computer Associates had recently joined there. And she called me and said, hey, you interested in, a new opportunity? And it was great because I took that as okay, time to move on. So I went to Princeton Softtech. And so at Princeton Softtech, there's an interesting story that the founders of Princeton Softtech, there were 9 of them, they were all at Computer Associates. They left Computer Associates to form their own company, Princeton Softtech. And so these guys taught me, like, it's okay to take chances, because they basically just stepped out on their own. They formed this company and very quickly started to have some good success. So you could still consider them, excuse me, a startup. But each of them, each of those founders were about making sure that they were providing an environment for people to grow, for people to learn, and for people to succeed, which is what attracted me to that company. One of the reasons that I went there, and one of the things that sold me on the company, I was still young, like I didn't understand equity, right? Nobody really taught me about equity in a company, like options and things like that. I came to learn those lessons later in life, but I knew that at the time my wife was pregnant, I was looking to make more money, and this was an opportunity to do so. And so when I talked to the person that hired me, one of the things that we were talking about, I said, listen, I don't know if I can come now because I can't take a chance on healthcare because my wife she's deep into pregnancy, and I don't want to take any chance in coverage or doctors or anything like that. And what she told me was, don't worry about it. If there's any issues, we'll cover it through COBRA for you on your current plan, and we'll pay it for you. And so, again, worried about me, the person, as well as what I can bring to the table for them. And so my work at Computer Associates actually beat me to Princeton Softtech because they knew what I could do from a contribution standpoint. And so I used that when I got to Princeton Softtech to really start to grow my career, right? And so from there, I was one of 2 people in their kind of support organization, but that's where I also started to get my feet wet in some of the engineering and development practices that I would use later on as part of late year Princeton Softtech and soon to be IBM. So from the standpoint of Princeton Softtech, that was an 8-year run. And so 8 years at Princeton Softtech, where, again, I saw a lot of different things happen from a personnel perspective, but also the technology landscape was changing. I remember we crossed over year 2000 when I was at Princeton Softtech, and that was a big thing, right? But I had a couple mentors there that I still use today, because that's where I also started to get connected to more of an international presence. So Princeton Softtech had offices across the globe, and I had never really dealt with international teams before. So this is where there was a nuance between how we connect with each other in the States and how we connect with folks internationally, because there's just a different culture and a different way of doing things. And I had to learn that very methodically. And in some cases, I would say the hard way, because I've made some mistakes where I know I've offended people. I took that seriously because I know how much I've been offended being a Black man in a predominantly large, white world, right? So I took a lot of time and energy to really get good at that. And by the way, I think I am pretty good at it now. So anyway, so Princeton Softech, I went from support to managing a team of people to learning about their international pre-sales activity, post-sales activity. So I got really attached to different parts of the business. How does finance run? How does post-sales run? How does engineering run? How does it all come together, right? And what are the core components that actually are making this company that when I joined was literally a few $1 million to where they actually got acquired by IBM, in 2007. So again, just kind of growing my career, we get to 2007. Right prior to that, there was a lot of change within Princeton Softech because they were venture backed. The VCs wanted to get the company sold. They brought in a new CEO. And so when I think about that, there was a 3-year window from 2004 to 2007, where that was the key time for Princeton Softech to the IBM transition. The new CEO had been the CEO of a couple companies beforehand and had gone through this exact exercise. And that's where I started to get really clear about what I wanted to do long term. And so there were three pivotal moments kind of in that era that I think helped shape and help me actually get grounded in what I really wanted and who I was. One was, as I said, I ran the pre-sales group, I ran the post-sales group, I ran the customer support group, I ran an engineering group. But when I was in the pre-sales group, the sales leader I was reporting to at the time, he and I didn't see eye to eye, but I was okay with that. Like, I didn't need to be his friend. I was doing a job, and and so I could work through, like, let's just make sure we're getting work done. But at some point, I realized, like, that's not the career I want. So I wanted to go back to really more of a professional services type role that I had before. And I remember a telling conversation right before I did that, which was I walked into his office and we had a conversation about it. And he said, well, I'm curious. He said, doesn't the opportunity and the money attract you? Like, you could make a lot of money in this role. And at that point, I remember saying to him very, very vividly, because we both had kids, and I said, let me ask you a question before I answer your question. When is the last time you made it to one of your kids' lacrosse games? And he looked at me and he said, I haven't been there all season. And my response was, I haven't missed my kids' games at all. I'm not interested in traveling right now. I'm interested in kind of growing my family and making sure that my family knows that I'm there and I want to be there for them. Of course I wanted money. Of course I wanted all that, but I had to make a choice at that point, which for me could have been a career choice, because he had the ear of the CEO, he had the ear of other folks, and he could have made it difficult. I think what the benefit to me was, I built some really, really strong relationships at Princeton Softech. And so I had the support of other executives with the choice that I was making. And so, that was a defining moment for one of the defining moments for me. So I moved back to the role I was in, professional services, again, working for somebody who I talk to today. We try to have lunch and stuff every now and then. So I still talk to him today. He taught me a lot. He was very, very, very much a mentor. Would bring me into executive meetings that other people didn't get the privilege to do. And so he gave me some great opportunity to learn about, again, what happens in the executive meetings, because to that point, I hadn't been in them. I would contribute data and information, but I wasn't in the room. he actually started bringing me into the room, which was a very interesting dynamic because no other manager was doing that for their team. And when I got into the room and looked around the room, nobody else looked like me. So it was a good education experience for me in terms of, okay, this is what's happening. And so in doing that, it was interesting when this new CEO came in and he's trying to figure out who's who across the business. Defining moment number 2, he took me to dinner one night. I wasn't even in the office. He called his secretary. His secretary called me and said, hey, can we meet for dinner? In meeting for dinner, he said, listen, he said, I realize all the work coming from that professional services organization is actually your handiwork. I know you're actually feeding the team, even though you're not presenting it. And he goes, one of the things that will be important for your career is to get out from under other people who are taking credit for your work. And he goes, I can help you do that, but it's more important for you to do it than for me to push people out of your way. And so from that point forward, as we were having these meetings in the room, I would take opportunities, not the whole thing. I wouldn't look to outshine people. Sean, we just talked about this. I wouldn't look to outshine people, but I would look to basically introduce and inject commentary that let people know, no, I actually do know. And it's really because I actually did the legwork, right? And so that was a big thing for me because I'm by nature, I'm not a very vocal person. I'm an introvert. I'm when you do your test, I'm your ISTJ guy, right? I like things in order, but I'm an introvert by nature. So anyway, so that got us, into another realm. And then the last thing between the Princeton Softtech to IBM transition was, again, this same CEO, he sat me down and he pulled out a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper was just simply a grid. And it had smiley faces. And it said, like, where do you want your smiley face to be? Well, there was no context. I'm like, I don't know. I think up and to the right, but I don't know. He's like, well, what do you want to do? And that's when we got to, like, look, eventually I think my path is I want to be COO somewhere. Didn't know where, didn't know how. I just knew that was the path I was on. So then he actually starts drawing on this paper and he says, look, it's not going to happen by accident. If that's what you want, then chart your path. And so in the path, on one axis, he put ages, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, so on and so forth. The other path, he put titles like roles, head of operations, manager of operations, head of global operations, VP of operations, SVP of operations, chief operation officer. And he goes, okay. At that time, he asked me that. Let's see, that's going back. So I was probably just late 30s, early 40s. Okay, let's get to that dot. And like, what role are you at? Well, at the time I was at the Princeton Softtech to IBM transition, I was really kind of director of support and operations. So I said, okay, good. So here's where you are, and here's where you're trying to get to. When do you want to become COO? I'm like, well, ideally by the time I'm 50, I want to be COO. Okay, great. So that's our other benchmark. And so he took those 2 dots and he says, here's the work you need to do between these two dots, right? And you got to look at it. What skills don't you have that you need? And he said, it's not just operation skills. He goes, product marketing. Do you know how product marketing works? I'm like, a little bit. He goes, all right, we need to spend time on product marketing. Do you know how product management works? I'm like, yeah, I know how product management works. Do you know how this works? Yes. Have you ever carried a sales bag? No. All right, you don't have to do that, but if you can, you should do that too. But anyway, we walked through that and we literally wrote it down. I have a notebook. It's actually at the office at the Jornaya office right now, because I use that same framework for people I talk to now. But in there are all my notes from that conversation. And that was the kind of the jet fuel, if you will, that started to accelerate my path from, hey, I'm just going to be coming to work every day, doing good stuff, always growing and grinding, to, no, I'm going to be COO somewhere. I don't know where yet, but somewhere. And so if we keep on moving, so now IBM acquires Princeton Softtech, and now in my mind, honestly, I'm like, okay, COO IBM, I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if I want it to happen there, to be honest, because I also realized through this transition of computer associates to Princeton Softtech to IBM, I'm not a huge company guy. I can thrive in them, and I can work in them, but it's not my preference. And so I go to IBM, and I'm like, okay, I'll see how this plays out. I don't know if I want to stay here. But lo and behold, IBM starts giving me some more opportunity and some access to things that I didn't have before. I'm like, okay, there's a learning ground here. So I took that as an opportunity to kind of really learn about, and this is when like cloud computing was like supercharged right now, and like something that I hadn't done. So I got an opportunity to run 8 engineering teams simultaneously across the globe around cloud computing. And very, very interesting. Like it really start to shape like, okay, this cloud computing thing is going to be real. It's going to be around for a while, so on and so forth. But also now managing teams that I didn't have a relationship with because they were new. We were Princeton Softtech coming in, but they gave us access to a bunch of other resources. So for me, it was, all right, let's see if I can actually lead these teams to success. And they did. They really did. I made, again, some great relationships with some really good leaders that were on engineering teams that I was responsible for. And they did a phenomenal job. I mean, and a lot of them have grown within the IBM ecosystem. But I did that for about 8 years. And then I got really, then it got a little bit monotonous for me because I was spending hours and hours and hours just on the telephone. So that's when I took an opportunity to start to look for something new. And at that time, again, someone else that I was working very closely with had moved to a new company. So as I started to look, I had 2 offers. One was this other company, one was Lead ID. Lead ID came about simply because the CFO at the time of Lead ID used to be the CFO at Princeton Softtech. And he and I kept the connection. In addition to the talent acquisition person that was at Lead ID used to do talent acquisition at Princeton Softtech. By the way, the contracts person that was at Lead ID used to be the contracts person at Princeton Softtech. So I had those relationships. So now I'm talking to these 2 folks, one for Lead ID, one for this other company. And now I'm like trying to make a decision. What do I want to do? And for me, it all came down to who had a path to COO. And so Lead ID, one of the conversations I had with 𝗀𝗲𝘁'𝘀, former founder of Jornaya and Lead ID, very early on was, look, I know you're looking for a VP of operations today, and I'm good with that. But what I'm really more looking for is, how about in the next few years, what do you see this going to? How do you see this unfolding? And we had a very good conversation about that. And I didn't, at that time, I didn't put a time frame on it like, hey, you got 2 years or so I'm out. It was like, no, but I'm just telling you, like, this is my path. And I said this to Ross too. I'm like, I don't know if that path happens here, Ross. I just need to know it's a stepping stone, and I may need to leave Lead ID or Jornaya to get it, but I'm also willing to be here to get it. And so ultimately ended up at Lead ID, obviously. Again, one of the reasons I ended up at Lead ID, beyond just the career path, defining moment on a dinner with Ross was, we sat down and he had this one little restaurant he would go to in Ambler, PA, that he would always try to close people. And so in that conversation, he knew I had the other offer. I was very upfront with him. And he said, after talking to me, and we had a really good conversation, he said, all right, so in his typical sales fashion, so, it sounds like you're ready to join Lead ID. So, if you had to make a decision tonight, would you join Lead ID? I said, I don't think so. He's like, what? Like, I don't think so. He said, well, why not? I said, Ross, I got to be honest with you. I said, I love everything you said. I said, but at the time, Lead ID was still relatively small. I mean, had nice revenue growth, but wasn't profitable, was still trying to figure it away. This other company, was making $60–70 million in revenue, really, really stable. My kids were in that college years. We were fortunate and we wanted to, but it wasn't easy. Like, our kids went to private school. So financially, in my mind, I'm trying to think about school, education, stability, making sure that, something doesn't unravel. And I said, Ross, Lead ID is a startup, like a startup. I was like employee 55 or something. So, after he came back to himself, because he'll tell you, he was like, I was so surprised. He said, I couldn't tell if you were actually negotiating or if you were serious. He said, I would like to say I was negotiating, but I wasn't. I was very serious. But what turned the tide? We had a follow-up conversation when I talked to him about the financial uncertainty that was there for me. He never had financial uncertainty, but I did. He said, look, I can't guarantee you anything. He said, but I can guarantee you that every morning I wake up, I feel like I'm responsible for 55 families and making sure those families are able to do what they want to do financially. And that was the turning point. That was the turning point for me. In addition to the fact that the CFO, again, and I, who've had a relationship, he called me and he's like, look, I would never bring you here if I didn't think there was something here for you professionally, financially, and personally. And so that started the Lead ID world, right? And so I got to tell you, like, I never knew anything about the marketing world, performance marketing, no clue. When Ross explained Lead ID, like, I understood the concept. I could not wrap my mind around, like, why would this work? Like, what is this? But I was intrigued because it was something new and it's something I hadn't done. And it was leading me to where I wanted to go, which was this COO role. So joined Lead ID at the time in 2015. And, again, I had a broad background, which served well. I'll never forget, I joined in November. And then in January, we had some changes among the organization. And I remember getting a call from Ross, like, hey, want to have you start to play a role as well in our engineering team. I'm like, Ross, that's not what you brought me here for. He's like, it's all right. I want to have you at least oversee that for now to make sure that we're able to actually get some structure, right, into our engineering discipline and so on and so forth. So I immediately came in and, like, I was brought in for operations, customer operations, trying to get that piece of the business really solidified and organized, but then jumped immediately into engineering and really played a pretty big utility role, I would say, in the life of Lead ID and Jornaya. So 2 years in, Lead ID rebranded to Jornaya, as you guys all know, or maybe know, was venture backed for a while, got additional funding. The fund that they used, the venture firm they used, Edison Ventures, was an interesting story too. One of the founding partners of Edison Ventures was the CEO of Princeton SoftTech. So when they started connecting and we're talking, like, I knew the CEO of Princeton SoftTech, obviously, and so I made an instant connection with them, and they knew me from just history. And so when they were asking about who the management team is, et cetera, and they said my name, obviously we had an instant connection there. But again, what you're hearing is relationships, your network, where you can, don't burn bridges, right? And so anyway, so fast forward, continued conversations with Ross, and we would have regular meetings to talk about the business, but also about, hey, all right, what's next for Todd? And he was very open to it, which I appreciated. And we didn't rush to anything. We waited for the right time. But ultimately, we got to the point in the business where I think we realized that Jornaya is now this thing that has this very, very fast growth pattern and growth path that we need to get really disciplined about from an operational standpoint. And so that's when, I started taking on some more things. I ended up taking on the people operations side, HR stuff. customer operations, ended up taking on data security and compliance activities. And so all these things started to kind of unfold as, all right, hey, look, you have the operational side of the business and we'll run the market side of the business. And so that was interesting and scary. And so one of the things that during that time that I looked for was, again, another mentor or more mentors. So one of the people on the of the venture fund, I remember going to meet with him and just saying like, hey, generally speaking, like you've now engaged with me for a while. What's the board think about how I'm operating? Does the board think I can do anything else? Just trying to get some general feedback. And one of the things he said is like, look, things are going great. He says, but it's obvious that Jornaya is growing at a fast pace. And he knew too that I wanted to be COO. And he said, so 2 things that I'll share. He said, one is there's a book called Blueprint to a Billion. I'm not sure if anybody's ever read it, but it's about companies and how they got to be a $1 billion company. And there's a bunch of different lessons there, but one of them was around when companies realize they need an inside person and an outside person. He said, because I hadn't read it at the time either, he said, read the book. He said, you need to be the inside person. The inside person is managing everything within the business, behind the scenes. You don't need to be the person out on the stage unless that's what you want to do, but that's the CEO side of the house. And I told him, I said, I'm not interested in that. I like the, behind the scenes, getting work done and growing the business. So I read that book. He also put me in touch with somebody who had been a successful COO. He worked for a company called, I can't remember the name of the company, but they had a software package called 𝗀𝗲𝗁 360, MAAS 360, and they use it for mobile device management. Talk about, again, a small world. 𝗀𝗲𝗁 360 was actually acquired by who? IBM. And so it was funny because I was still at IBM at the time. I had to install 𝗀𝗲𝗁 360 on my phone because that's what they have for mobile device management. But anyway, the COO of that company met me at a Starbucks down by the office, and he and I basically started to draft out, what does your path look like? And so all this stuff just started to come together. And so like a couple just key things, and then I'll shut up, was like, one was just relationship building. I learned across my career that relationship building was just key. The other thing is just, you got to kind of define what you want. You don't have to know exactly, but you got to have a plan. And again, it's hard to do that sometimes depending on where you are in your career and your life. But without it, I don't know. I'm not saying I wouldn't have got to where I am, but I don't know that I would have done it in such a methodical way. And the other thing for me was just finding time to make sure I never forgot family, where I came from, or the principles that my parents, kind of taught me about. You got to grind. You grind around, you got to work, you got to get after it. So those are all things that I still carry today. My family at large still carries those today. My brother in Maryland, he's doing well. His kids are doing well. He's teaching them. My niece and my nephew, who I love hanging out with, super proud of them. They're doing their thing. My niece, plug and just a little bit of bragging, my niece just signed to University of Maryland for basketball. So she had gotten recruited. So I was happy to see her finally make her decision. So anyway, again, that's kind of the story to how I got here, and to now this company called Jornaya that got acquired by 𝗿𝗏𝗃. Being part of that was just huge, and was a great opportunity because I'm in the meetings with investors, with banks, having described why Jornaya is somebody that they want. How does that work? And then after all that's said and done, now part of 𝗿𝗏𝗃 and helping to drive the Jornaya business unit as a standalone unit within the 𝗿𝗏𝗃 ecosystem. And, again, quite frankly, we're just flat out crushing. We're just doing a phenomenal job. And that's, we've had a lot of transition. Obviously, Ross has moved on to additional things, but all the work that we did up to this point has put us in a position that, the company's doing well. And by default, as the company's doing well, I do take pride in saying that, yeah, I'm part of that. I'm part of helping make that happen. So I'm going to shut up now.
Wow. First and foremost, thank you so very much for sharing that story. And I love the detail thereof, because I feel like you took us from one all the way pretty much to 100. And we know that, 100 is not even there yet. You still have more and more to accomplish over the coming years by far. But knowing the humble beginnings, knowing that you flipped burgers and maybe and had some fries experiences like I did too as well.
Yeah.
Again, is wonderful. And then knowing that you went back to that, knowing the importance behind family and maintaining a balance in life, understanding what exactly it is that makes you rich. People think it's all about money. No, that's a portion thereof. Not really. It's about that balance of overall life and being able to do the things that you would like to do and experience it, because you know what? You'll never get that time back with your kids.
Nope.
It doesn't happen. Love that. And then I love the fact of how you highlighted your connections.
Yeah.
I know sometimes we live in a really big world, but in essence, the world becomes smaller and smaller when you get to a certain level and where you want to reach out to. And before you know it, the pieces are real. This piece is related to that piece that's related to this piece, and making sure, understanding the importance behind our connections. And as you said, talked about the fact of not burning bridges as you go, because you never know where you might have to go back.
Yeah.
It seems like in your level of success and your direction, you went and touched back several times that led you to where you are. So love that. And the last point I wanted to bring up is you found your voice.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like to some degree, I feel like even though we've only known each other for probably about 2 years now, I feel like I got cheated sometime because I've been in the industry for so long, but I just learned who you were. And I'm like, wow, maybe we could have all been connected, and Matt and everybody else. And again, why is it that we just are meeting? But again, you found your voice within some of those conversations and allowed you to further shine. So again, congratulations on all the success of the companies and again, for yourself individually.
Yeah, appreciate that for sure. Yeah, and I think you're spot on, man. I think it's when I look back and think about it, it's for me nothing but the grace of God and how the path has been highlighted for me to be able to walk. And it wasn't a straight path, but we got there.
Oh, you made it very human. And I want to open the floor up to anybody who might have any questions by far after that incredible presentation, because we all know Todd in a whole new way now.
Yeah, I got a question for you. Yeah, your story was, I loved it. I mean, I love the intentionality. I love the failures, but then the hard work ethic and then the relationships. I mean, I love that. I guess my biggest question is, I don't know. I'm curious, like, what's next? It's almost like you came from, you can say humble beginnings, and you took everything you had and you mapped out this course, however many 10, 15 years ago. And I don't know if your imagination has expanded, because you're so 2015, you reached it. And it's like, I assume you got another 10, 20, who knows how many more years to work. Again, it's like the fact that you can do, not that you have to, but I'm curious if you could put out that grid, put out a new sheet of paper, right? Look at that top right corner. Yeah. Do you think about that, or are you going to just coast and just, what's next?
I do think about it often. And there's two things in my mind. So one of the things and I didn't spend a bunch of time, but like, I do a bunch of stuff with our church. So like when pandemic hit, we didn't have streaming. And so I worked through setting up streaming. I'm basically the IT guy at church. And those are things that I like to do just to help, right? So that's one thing. The other thing I do, just volunteer, is I coach basketball, which is always funny when I walk into a gym and people are like, hey, which one is your kid? Like, my kids are all grown. They're not even home. Like, why are you here? Because I just like to do it. But to your point, Arvel, I think I have mapped it out. My goal at this point is, so I just turned 50 this year. I want to run hard for the next 5 years, right? And then at that point, one or two things, again, I've mapped in my head. I either want to go do one more startup, and try and do the same thing. I want to run that playbook to take a company, because there's some success in taking a company and helping them achieve success while I do it as well. That's one path. The other path is I completely scrap all of it and I go do these other things I like to do, which is maybe I go look to coach a high school basketball team. Maybe I go to just work full time at the church and help do things there, right? Those are the things that I'm thinking about, and I haven't completely charted them yet, but I do think about it very often, very often.
Yeah, thanks.
Todd, what was that book? I tried to Google it while you were talking. You said it was Blue Book to Billions, but nothing seemed to pop up for me.
Blueprint.
Oh, Blueprint.
Blueprint to a Billion.
Ah, got it.
Right here on my bookshelf.
Perfect.
And it's on Amazon.
Okay,
Yep.
I was looking at Blue Book.
Yeah. And I'm like, who did not write that down? Whoever, if you did not write that down, please, that is your cue to write that down without question. It's definitely in my notes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great book. It's very interesting when you learn about how companies got to $1 billion. Extremely interesting stories.
You know, and I think one of the things, Todd, that you actually were able to share with us is really the fact of, again, that mapping it out. You mentioned as far as meeting down with the CEO and he mapped it out for you. And he actually, to me, and based on your story and how you shared, is that he almost taught you how to have your voice, or how to, better yet, get your voice out there in the public eye, even though you wanted to stay in the, internally in the operations of the company and not maybe be the face of the company, but internally, you in essence became that father figure of the company, and let somebody else be able to go out there and do the outside figure thereof. But I love that, finding the voice as well as the fact of mapping it out. And guess what? And I'm sure everything didn't go in a straight line, as you mentioned, but it makes it very human to have it where you didn't have to have it where you didn't come and say, hey guys, I was a straight A student. I never missed a class. I never failed anything. And yes, I'm the COO and I'm brilliant, yada, yada. It is what it is. No, this is the fact of, I am human and I made some mistakes. And this is how I was able to kind of craft things through, but I developed a plan and I surrounded myself with good people. So love that. Matt?
Yeah, Todd, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this. I felt like I knew you already, but I knew at a whole new level now. So I definitely appreciate it. The one thing that stood out for me most, though, was, when we're talking about DE&I stuff, I continue to mention continuing the conversation, right? What stood out to me is that you talk to people all the time internally about your path. How do you get there? I think oftentimes what we find is that people are not talking internally to people that may be above them to say, help me create this path, right? Instead, we just go through the normal day-to-day operations of, this is what we do, right? Each and every day, this is our grind. But I think that in hearing the conversations you've had with CEOs and mentors and those that can help create this path is really what has enabled, a lot of your personal success. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And I'm sorry, I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking at my bookshelf because the other book that really talked to kind of just asking the question was The Pursuit of Happiness, right? And you think about that path of Christopher Gardner. It was one of the things in the book that stood out to me was he always asked questions of the people who were either in roles that he wanted to get to or somebody he had to go through to get to where he wanted to. And it was just always asking questions. And, one of the things my dad always said is it never hurts to ask. You'll also think about whether or not those people want to help you, or are they just going to be a blocker?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Todd, I've got 4 pages of notes here based on everything that you said as I just continued to write away because there's so much information here. But what I appreciate most is you opening up to this group and allowing us to get to know you. Yep. And I really feel as though you're someone I can come to and talk to about creating or charting this path. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, get in line. Get in line. See, he's always trying to jump to the front of the line. I tell you. See, by putting it out in the atmosphere, I was trying to be calm with it and be subtle, but yet, no, love it. Guys, we only have a few more
add to
minutes.
that because I already emailed Todd. I just LinkedIn and messaged you, Todd, to be like, hello. I want to make sure that you know that I would love to further connect. So love it.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Question I have, Todd, is just from hearing you, you're always looking at what's the next step for you. For me, I'm coming into this tech industry, I'm very new at it. I'm starting off as a BDR. How often do you personally sit with yourself and try to like map out the next step or the next plan? Because obviously we're all trying to grow and not just be stationary where we're at.
Yeah, good question, and thanks for that, because it's interesting. So I'm going to give you two answers. No less than every year, but one of the people that I learned from at IBM that I did not like was a terrible manager. I couldn't stand him. But the one thing I learned from him is you cannot get complacent with what's happening. So every 90 days, they adopted this thing where every 90 days they would change the teams and they would introduce a new set of people and teams. And what I took from that is, like, I don't need to do it every 90 days, but I probably every 6 months just do a self-evaluation. You know, where did I say I wanted to be? And maybe the answer is nowhere different. I'm good with where I am at that time, but probably the 6 month and the 12 month every year, twice a year, I'm at least thinking about it. And then, you know, throughout the course of the year, as things come up, as I maybe hear about opportunities, I'll always entertain them. But if it doesn't fit with where I ultimately believe I want to be or want to do, then I just, you know, respectfully listen to it and hear about it, but then just continue down my path and hope that my path is the right one for me. So anyway, I'd say you got to do it a couple times a year. And the other thing I would say is actually write it down and talk to somebody about it. Because again, they may be able to give you some thoughts about, well, like, that's a good idea, but did you think about X, Y, and Z? So don't, you know, it's not just a self-evaluation, it's let me actually talk out loud about it and see if it really makes sense, because it doesn't stick.
Okay.
Todd, again, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, all members.
Thanks, everybody.
And we're going to get this out there to the public as well. The world needs to know what's going on with Todd. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.